3, 2, 1.
Well, what's going on, friends? So welcome back to another episode of the Metaverse Church Podcast. We're back at it again, talking about a whole bunch of stuff Metaverse. And some of you guys are listening, you're like, man, this stuff is really great. And there's probably some of you out there listening to this, and you're like, man, these guys, man, they are a shame and a disgrace to the church. And you know what? Maybe one day we'll meet and we can talk face to face. Not fight, because we wouldn't do that. All love. But anyways, I actually, Goose, you and I talked about this at one point in time, that I was listening to a couple of different podcasts and they were talking about Metaverse Church kind of stuff, and they were talking about how it's a dumb idea and this shouldn't be a thing within the church, and all, just stuff along those lines. And I remember reaching out to you at one point when we were talking about getting in this Kickstarter. I was like, one of these days I'm going to invite those naysayers onto our podcast and just have a back and forth conversation as to why they feel that way versus, why we see legitimacy and what it is that we're doing, which obviously will feed into what we're talking about in this episode. But the realistic side of things is like, there's probably people out there who are listening to our podcast that aren't like commenting, leaving any kind of reviews or anything. They're just kind of on the fly or on the wall listeners, and they're probably sitting there skeptical of everything that we're talking about. And realistically, listener, if that's you, or viewer, if that's you, like, that's part of the reason why Goose and I are doing this. Like, we want to bring some legitimacy to the idea of a metaverse church, because man, the future is here and the future continues to grow, and the church needs to be a part of it, and this is just part of it. So I'm excited.
Definitely. Yeah. If there's any, if there's any skeptics after today, we'll definitely find out.
Yeah, that is for sure. So that being said, hey, let's tee this up the right way. Just what are some wins? We started doing this about a week or so ago. What's a win that you're seeing in virtual reality or metaverse as a whole for the church?
I mean, the wins that we've seen over the last really couple weeks, but over the last week, really the same sort of stuff. I mean, every week we're having amazing conversations, and so I would say that personally, I mean, I'll just speak for Cornerstone. I see this as a win. And I'll make it a plug. We decided that we are going to go over to Horizon. And that's going to be where I'm not calling it a replacement campus for Altspace, because it's not that. It happens to be at the same time, but it's a new campus, because not everybody that's in Altspace is going to be over there. We're not going to carry the same maturity of the campus that we had, and we know that it is an end and a new beginning over there. But the win for me has been the response that some people have had, which is, hey, let's go, and how can we help? So there is some excitement about the idea of, like, we're kind of spinning up something new with a ton more experience than we've had in the past. Mm-hmm. And so I would say for me, the win has been just the excitement that is built around doing a new campus in Horizon. So that for sure has been the biggest win for me, and I think for Cornerstone this week. Yeah. What about you?
Yeah, dude, that's great. I love it. For us, if I were to just sell two wins right now, where I have seen God move in a great way. So. We did all those deep dive episodes, and we talked about the major platforms of Horizons and Big Screen, Rec Room, all that. And one that you and I have been talking about recently, we've started playing in a little bit more. And, you've told me that you haven't been too hands-on with it yet, but we launched into spatial.io this past weekend, and I've been super excited about just learning a little bit more about Spatial and what it is that they have to offer. The other thing that I've been super excited about with them is they're asking, to me anyways, they're asking all the right questions. Like, they're they're really trying to win that alt space users base right now. So they're just asking the questions. Like I hopped onto their Discord earlier this weekend. They were asking a recent question of, hey, when it comes to our main event boards, like what would you like to see us bring to it that would be beneficial? And from what some of the answers were, like I haven't seen the question asked that I want to see yet, so I'm kind of waiting to put in my 2 cents on it. But like I'm waiting for somebody to say, like the main event feature that alt space had, instead of it just being an all-encompassing board. Like I'm looking for that main event, like here's Lakeland VR right when you log on, kind of thing. But some of the responses have been really cool. Like some people have been like, what I would really love to see is if there's an event that's going on that I'm interested in, like future tense, like I want to be able to save it as something that I'm interested in, which you could do in alt space. But they wanted it to integrate, integrate, right word? They wanted it to work with their calendar. Like if they press like I'm interested in this, it would automatically populate their calendar
like
to remind them.
like Google Calendar or something like that.
Yeah. I was like, that's fascinating. I like that idea. So I'm just excited with what Spatial's doing. I had the opportunity to introduce the Lakeland staff to Spatial last week there in our staff meeting. I sent them all the link. I told them, hey, everybody bring your computers with you. And I think what's exciting about Spatial is just the accessibility to it. The fact that there is a desktop feature, there's a mobile app along with it, as well as the VR headset capability. Like there was just so many ways of being able to do this that I even dropped to my executive pastor and senior pastor and said, could this potentially replace how we do streaming as a whole for Lakeland, that we don't send people to Facebook, we don't send people to YouTube, but we drop in the Spatial link and all of our online attenders are now experiencing Lakeland VR with people around the world. So there's just a lot of opportunities with it. And for me, the win is just the excitement that the staff had over the platform. Like they were in there jumping around, clapping, dancing, just having a grand old time. So I would say that's the one win that I saw. The other one that I got to share with our staff, even today as we record this, was we've had a guy who has been popping in and out of Lakeland and alt space for probably a couple months now. And he's a student, and he just started asking me a whole bunch of questions. Like he was coming in for the sole purpose of academics, just wanting to learn for a master's degree and everything that they're working on. And in the process of him coming in to study for his degree and get a good handle on everything, all of a sudden I started to notice, like, you're asking me questions that I don't know if it pertains to your degree or not, but it's starting to get along the line where this past weekend I was able to just simply ask, hey, you've asked me tons of questions. You're like, one of the questions that he asked was, when all space shuts down, where's Lakeland going? Because he wanted to be a part of wherever it is that we're going next. And that to me was like the open door opportunity where I just say, hey, you've been asking me a whole bunch of questions when it comes to like your degree and stuff. Like, do you mind if I throw a question at you now? And I was just able to ask simply like, hey, what's your spiritual journey? Like, how does your faith story, how is that written thus far? And it was just really great to, have that next step conversation. So he probably knows exactly who he is. He started listening to the podcast and he commented. He even hopped into our Discord server, the Metaverse Church Discord server. So nice. If you know who you are, you're listening to this, I'm so thankful that you shared your story with me, and excited to see how that story continues to get written later on. So so we kind of touched on it a little bit here. Like, if there are skeptics to this idea of Metaverse Church and what the church involvement is with all of this, this is definitely probably going to be that episode for you where you might have your naysay hat on, and it's totally welcome. We're going to be addressing some topics in this that you might agree with us on. Goose and I don't know, we might not even see eye to eye on this, but I alluded to it in the last episode, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to address some what would probably be common questions that people are asking of, like, hey, can you do this as a church in virtual reality in a legitimate way? So I'll start off with an easy one, Goose, just because this is something that you guys at Cornerstone are doing. Counseling.
Yeah.
Church, like I've been a part of a church that has a biblical counseling arm. We refer people to great counselors here at Lakeland IRL. One of our visions going into VR right off the bat was to launch a recovery type program in there. So, but you guys, you've got a counseling arm. So, on the heels of our conversation of anonymity, where you don't really know people that well, but yet they kind of get real right away, is biblical counseling a legitimate option for metaverse VR churches?
Yeah. Yeah, we think it 100% is. The mechanism for for counseling, for biblical counseling is a discussion. It's a talk. It's a working through the issues that somebody has and giving them the biblical answers to what their problems are, and offering them the chance for freedom through that, and ultimately through Christ, right? So, and it's more about just helping someone change their perspective and see things in a different way. And so, all of that is just discussion based. And so, that one right there seems like an easy one with very little criticism that seems valid. The main criticism, in terms that I'm aware of, at least in terms of anything in that vein of counseling or pastoring or the discussion, what do you lose in VR that you have in the physical spaces? Well, you don't get body language, and you don't get the look on their face, and so therefore you can't really ascertain like properly what's going on. Now, I get that there is some benefit to that, but there actually can be drawbacks to that as well. And we see this actually was a legal thing. As an attorney, we know this from something like jury selection. And this actually was a case. And the question was, could someone who is blind be a juror? And the argument against was many of the criticisms that are levied against VR and counseling and what's lost.
Yeah.
Well, no, because a juror is supposed to be able to look at a witness and hear a witness and see body language and tell if they're lying, or tell if they're credible, tell if they're embellishing something. You need, the idea is you need the visual feedback, the visual information in order to do that well. And expert after expert really kind of destroyed the argument. And of course, we do allow, visually impaired jurors. And actually, the criticism was on the other side, saying, no, actually, sometimes all of that gets in the way. Sometimes it gets in the way of whether or not you can properly ascertain what's going on with somebody. And in the case of the juror, you might look at somebody and, well, they're attractive, and you might think that they're telling the truth because of that, when in fact they're not. Or someone is, adept at using body language to mask what's going on. And so anyway, expert after expert debunked this idea that you've got to have visual feedback in order to have a valid communication and a valid, view, perspective of what's going on. Now, again, it's not a one-to-one comparison. I get it, because jurors are jurors and counselors are trained, and they're trained to recognize cues and all of that. So I get it's not a perfect analogy, but I do think the idea is still relevant, that you don't necessarily need all that in order to tell what's going on. And in some case, it is helpful to cut through all of that and just hear what someone is saying. All that being said, even if there is something lost, where universally, no, it is not as good because we don't get the visual information, I would further argue that, but what do we gain? We gain what we've already talked about, which is this absolutely microwaved relationship where people are so much more open and willing to share over a VR headset, that I would argue I keep the visual aids, because I'm getting such unfiltered thoughts that the trade-off is worth it. So can it be done? Absolutely. Is it better? I'm not willing to say that, at least not yet. But is it valid? I would argue 100%.
Yeah, I love some of the points that you're making in there, just because they say like 80% of our communication is nonverbal for the most part. But you're right. Like I can remember like Melissa and I going through our premarital. Melissa's my wife, by the way. I don't think that's come out in this podcast yet, but I remember when we went through premarital, like there's a lot of that premarital process that talks about like how to be active listeners and good communicators as this married couple. And there's practices that they had us go through anyways, that was along the lines of, this is going to sound ridiculous, but I want you guys until our next session, whenever you're having a conversation with one another, somebody says something, then like the guy who led us or our premarital is like, Stu, whenever Melissa says something, when she's done, I want you to say, what I heard you say was. So I'm always constantly repeating back what my takeaway was from what my wife was relaying to me verbally. In so doing, I have found within just like VR, when I'm talking to people, because without the visual cues that people are giving me, it forces me more so to listen intently to what it is that they're saying. That way I'm listening for those verbal cues of like, what's really going on. Like, Carlos Whitaker, he's an author, pastor. I believe he's pastor in church in the Tennessee area, but he wrote a book called Kill a Spider. And really the concept of it is that we so typically pray away the cobwebs of like the problems in our life, but we never actually pray for the spider to get killed. So the thing that's the root cause of the problem. And so we're eliminating some of the fog while never eliminating the process. And I would argue that in virtual reality, because you're having to intently focus on the words that are being used, that it actually helps it. I found this to be true for myself. It actually helps me to get more to the root problem of what somebody is communicating to me, because I can sit there using those same active listening skills that I learned through like premarital and whatnot. I get to sit there and say, I hear you say this, but I want to talk about this for a second, because I feel like I hear like, Holy Spirit led to, I feel like that there's something more in this general area, and this is just a symptom of what's going on. And then because of just the pure openness, transparency that comes because there is this mask, right? And realistically, all of us are wearing masks all the time. Just in VR, it tends to be a clearer mask that we're seeing right in front of us. It's like, I have no idea who you are. And even if I were to see you face to face, I might still not know who you are because I don't know what mask you're wearing at the time. So VR to me allows all that to kind of get stripped away for deeper conversation to take place for the sake of being able to get to a root of an issue that's going on and be able to say, okay, this is where I find the enemy attacking. Like let's go on the offensive now instead of playing defense against this thing. So, yeah, so like I would agree with you. I think that there's a legitimacy to the idea of counseling being done for the sake of just freedom and health in virtual reality, which if you're in the church world, if you're in ministry, like that is ultimately what we're moving towards, right? We're trying to move people closer to freedom, and that freedom is found in Jesus. So again, you might be a skeptic listening to this, watching this, and hopefully my goal right now is that maybe we just did a check mark on like, okay, that's good. What else counseling wise?
Well, I mean, the difficulties, of course, is longevity. So, the first question is, can it be done? And again, I would argue that it's a yes, and we've seen fruit from that. So it's again, that if the results I think speak for themselves. but if we want to, sort of extend it and say, okay, it can be done, but is it good? Like, is it is it really helpful? And or at least what are the difficulties? The biggest difficulty, and again, I know we've touched on this a little bit, is just the longevity of it, and whether or not, and how easy it is for people to pull away. You invest in someone, and you get a good rhythm. And I don't know that this is actually any better or worse than in the physical world, because it's, people pull away in the physical world as well. But it just seems like it's that much easier for someone to kind of go dark in the metaverse, because it is kind of almost like a cultural thing too. And so it just seems like it's just that much easier. And again, I don't know if that's real or if that's imagined or not, but keeping people in that rhythm and having like perseverance in it, that to me, I like to think that I don't pull punches in either my counseling or my discipleship. But if I'm honest, I would probably say it crosses my mind when I get to the point with someone where I'm really going to have to challenge them, where I've gotten to the point where there's enough trust where I say, listen, here's the change you need to make, or here's your problem, whether you want to hear this or not, here's your problem. I would have to be honest and say that I like to think I don't pull the punch, but it is in the back of my mind. This person may not talk to me after this. They may just be gone, and that may be the end of it. That may be the end of this DM chain or counseling, relationship or discipleship relationship. So again, I'm not saying that's a reason that we shouldn't do it. It's one of the hurdles that I think we have to overcome. Not that it doesn't exist in the physical sense, but maybe a little bit worse for us.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say is like I hear what you're saying, but at the same time, how many times have people hopped into an IRL counseling session and then got ticked off at what was being said to them, and they're like, I'm never coming back to this person ever again because I don't like the way that they stared at me the entire time that I was talking. So it's like I feel like some of the same downsides to VR can also be applied to in real life too. The one that I was thinking was, I mentioned, the premarital that Melissa and I went through, and we're talking about counseling, and I feel like there's so many different genres that we could touch upon when it comes to counseling. Would you say that it applies all across the board, counseling wise? Like, could you do marriage counseling in there? Like, let's say that two people serve at Lakeland or attend Lakeland VR. They live with each other. They're a married couple, and they have found that virtual reality is like their greatest way of attending church. They live someplace else, even we'll say that. If they came to me and they're like, hey, we're having some marital issues, and I felt like that it was above what I could handle, could I come to Goose and say, hey, I got two people who serve on my team, they only attend in VR, would you be willing to sit down and do marriage counseling with them? Like, does that play 100%. In VR? Yeah,
100%. We've done it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, we've done it. And I haven't seen anything that's been lost on it, because the discussion and the information, the prayer that we pray together, it's all communicated, and whether it leaves my lips and hits their eardrum, or it leaves my lips, goes over a VR headset and hits their eardrum, in the end, it doesn't matter. And to say that it does really, I think, ignores scripture. I mean, I come back to the faith of the centurion who tells Jesus, like, you don't even have to come to my house. If you say the word, I know my servant will be healed. Yeah. And Jesus is like, that's faith. Jesus marveled at that faith. And so every time we say that healing can come at a distance, to me, we're invoking the faith of the centurion. We're saying, yes, and again, just to reiterate for anybody who hasn't been on this journey with us, I mean, we both are from churches that affirm the value of the in-person church, the in-person gathering. We affirm it. We encourage it. We try to place people in churches to the extent that we can, like local churches. So we affirm all of that, but at the same time, we also say it's not absolutely required. And so that's where, again, I come back to the faith of the centurion, where we say, oh, can healing come through the power of the Holy Spirit delivered over a headset? Of course it can.
Yeah. Oh man, Pastor Goose, way to hit it, buddy. Yeah, so really, we're going to be, for these next couple of episodes, we're just going to be journeying down this path of like asking really the hard questions that many church leaders are probably hesitant to say, yes, this can be done or should be done in virtual reality or a metaverse arena. And so we're actually going to call it good on this episode, just talking about counseling. And I feel like we can close it on the sense that all counseling in general has a legitimate place for the church in metaverse. Would you, yay, nay?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you guys are looking more specifically at like, recovery type of counseling. And I know that some of the big names have been reluctant to get into VR, although I think they're actually now exploring it. And so things like substance abuse and, and trauma and things like that, like I think all of the same principles apply to what I'm saying. However, I know they are nuanced. And so I don't necessarily want to like plant my flag on every single nuanced form of counseling, because there may be something where somebody's like, yeah, you haven't thought of this. And they're right. I can only tell you in the context of what we've done, what I've seen, and even what I've heard about, as far as, general counseling, marital counseling, things like that. Now, we haven't talked about premarital counseling, but I think we'll probably save that one for the next episode. But yeah, I would say generally so far I haven't heard of any that I would say, no, that can never work. Yeah. It might pose some different challenges, but so far I haven't. But this is where our audience is going to be a great benefit. Where if they've got a question, or maybe they think of one that says no, like, let's talk about it.
All right. Well, with that, then let's close it out with this. As always, this is my invite to you as a listener and the viewer. If you're hearing this, and as exactly what Goose just said, you're listening to this and you're like, nope, you can't do this because of XYZ. If there's something that we're not thinking about that you got the insight on, here is the invitation to you to reach out to us, whether that's the Metaverse Church Podcast at gmail.com. You hop over to our Discord channel, which the link to that is always in the show notes, or you want to drop it in the chat here on YouTube. If that's where you're watching it, reach out to us. We would love to have that conversation, further conversation with you, maybe even invite you onto the show to just investigate that a little bit further. But we'll come back probably next week with a conversation on premarital, and whether or not that is a legitimate thing that you can do in virtual reality. The big one that I'm curious of is, I'll be curious if we even dive into this on that conversation. If somebody who lives in South Africa starts dating somebody who lives in the UK, but they attend a United States-based VR church, United States-based, I guess it would be US-based. Like, I'd probably say we could easily do VR or a premarital. That'll be for the next topic or the next episode. But at what point does this start to get a little gray in some areas, which it might be a lot? Again, Goose, our resident attorney, could probably give us some insight on that. But
we've already dealt with this, so next episode should be interesting.
Sweet. All right. So that will be for next week's episode. As always, please leave a rating and review. If this is beneficial to you at all, please subscribe to it. That way you never miss out on an episode. When you do all of those things, our friend Algorithm loves it so much. And he says, here, let's promote you to other people that might find this interesting. So you help us in the sense of doing that. So thank you again for listening to the Metaverse Church podcast. And we will see you next week as we continue on with this, I guess, mini series now. Well, there we go. Thanks. Be blessed.